Jim Braden, who we mentioned earlier, was not only on the third floor of the Daltex building that day, but the night before he was at the Mafia-owned Cabana Hotel, where another fellow just happened to be, and his name was Jack Ruby. Braden was a known member of organized crime who had connections to David Ferry and Carlos Marcello, the Mafia godfather who confessed to an FBI informant that he had ordered the assassination and that Ferry had introduced him to Lee Harvey Oswald. Researchers later discovered that Braden had worked at the Pere Marquette building in New Orleans, on the same floor where David Ferry came in regularly to pick up his mail. The building was owned by Carlos Marcello. Now at this point, some of you must be thinking, the bullet that fell out from Governor Connolly's leg must have been fired by Oswald, because it was positively linked to Oswald's rifle. But critics have always been skeptical of this bullet because of its near pristine condition, and when the grooves of the bullet were examined microscopically, there was no trace of human blood or tissue. As we will see, there are even better reasons to be skeptical. The FBI told the Warren Commission that CE-399 was found on Governor Connolly's stretcher by hospital orderly Darrell Tomlinson. Tomlinson did indeed find a bullet on the stretcher that day, but he has always been adamant that the stretcher he found it on was not Connolly's.
Darrell Tomlinson, a Parkland Hospital employee, reenacts how he found that bullet on a stretcher. The bullet was ballistically traced to Oswald's rifle. The Warren Commission concluded that it was the bullet that had wounded both men and that it had fallen out of Connolly's clothing onto his hospital stretcher.
The bullet was found here in this area, and not on that stretcher. That's the stretcher I took off the elevator.
The stretcher he took off the elevator was Connolly's, so Tomlinson found the bullet on a different stretcher not connected to the case. This led critics to claim the bullet was planted, but the commission decided Tomlinson was mistaken.
It was there when I came up.
Of course, that doesn't mean that a bullet was planted. What is far more likely is that the bullet Tomlinson found was from a different victim who had nothing to do with the shooting in Dealey Plaza. Look at this drawing he made for the Warren Commission. He said the stretcher labeled A was the one he took off the elevator, which was Connolly's. He said that a doctor pushed the stretcher out of the way to get into the restroom, and that he, Tomlinson, later pushed it back, which is when the bullet fell to the floor. Look at where the restroom is located. He had to have been talking about the other stretcher, not Connolly's. After discovering the bullet, Tomlinson brought it to his supervisor, Mr. O.P. Wright. Wright passed the bullet on to Secret Service agent Richard Johnson. Johnson then passed it on to his supervisor, Chief James Rowley, who then gave it to the FBI. The FBI sent the bullet off to their labs and then presented CE-399 to the Warren Commission. But after Tomlinson had testified that the bullet came from a different stretcher, the Commission started to get maybe a little bit suspicious, and they told the FBI to go back and get confirmation from the witnesses who had examined the original bullet. And that's when the trouble began. First they showed it to Secret Service agent Richard E. Johnson, but Johnson said he could not identify it as the same bullet. And then they showed it to Johnson's supervisor, James Rowley, who also refused to confirm the bullet. The FBI had the same problem with the two civilians. An FBI airtel dated 6/20 of 1964 stated that neither Tomlinson nor his supervisor O.P. Wright would confirm the bullet. That airtel, by the way, was top secret. It was never shown to the Warren Commission. Instead, they told the Warren Commission a different story. They said that FBI agent Bardwell D. Odom interviewed the two men, and that although they refused to officially confirm CE-399, they said it appeared to be the same bullet. But years later, researchers Uzziah Thompson and Dr. Gary Aguilar became suspicious when they discovered that there was no record of such an interview in the National Archives. So they contacted then-retired agent Bardwell Odom and asked him about it. He replied, "I didn't show it to anybody at Parkland. I didn't have any bullet. I don't think I ever saw it even." So, what seems to have happened is that when the FBI discovered that the bullet that Tomlinson found did not come from Oswald's rifle, they switched it for one that did. So, if the bullet found by Tomlinson was not the one that fell out of Governor Connolly's thigh, then what happened to the one that really did? Well, fortunately, Governor Connolly answered that question for us. This is from his autobiography entitled In History's Shadow. "The most curious discovery of all took place when they rolled me off the stretcher and onto the examining table. A metal object fell to the floor with a click no louder than a wedding band. The nurse picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. It was the bullet from my body, the one that passed through my back, chest, and wrist, and worked itself loose from my thigh." If Governor Connolly was correct that the bullet was retrieved by a nurse, then the bullet that fell from his thigh could not have been the same one that Tomlinson found. Connolly's recollection was corroborated by the Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade. This is from an interview he gave to the Dallas Morning News on November 21st of 1993. "I also went out to see Connolly, but he was in the operating room. Some nurse had a bullet in her hand and said this was on the gurney that Connolly was on. Question, what did you do with the bullet? Is this the famous pristine bullet people have talked about? I told her to give it to the police, which she said she would. I assume that's the pristine bullet." So, what did the nurse do with that bullet? Well, according to an FBI report, it was passed on to Texas Highway Patrolman Bobby M. Nolan, although the FBI described it as a fragment removed from Connolly's left thigh. Amazingly, it only took a few minutes to track down Bobby Nolan, who was alive and well and remembered the incident at Parkland Hospital like it was yesterday. With his permission, I recorded our conversation, although I had my recording level set a bit too high, which caused some clipping distortion. However, I think the conversation can still be easily understood.
Y'all was talking to a man who was one of Governor Connolly's aides. His name was, I think it was Bill, it was either Stenton or Simmons. And he was an aide to the governor, and she came up and told him that she had the bullet that came off of the gurney. Now, I don't know what gurney, I think maybe Governor Connolly's gurney. And she said, "What do you want me to do with it?" I was just sitting there in the hallway in the hospital talking, and he turned to me and said, "Give it to him."
A bullet fragment or a complete bullet? Or how large was it?
I don't know. It was. They told me that it was a bullet, and I don't know if it was a fragment of a bullet or if it was a whole bullet, because it was in a little small brown envelope.
Okay.
And this was sealed, and it was about I'd say 2 by 3 inches, and it was in that envelope
Okay.
when I got it. And I never did look at it or anything.
Okay. Now, when the nurse gave it to you, did she describe it as a bullet fragment or as a bullet?
No, she just said it was a bullet, that's all.
Bill Stinson also told members of the press that a bullet was retrieved from Governor Connolly's leg. But after the envelope which contained that bullet was passed on to the FBI, a miracle took place. The bullet from the governor's thigh turned into tiny fragments from his wrist. This is the evidence envelope that Officer Noland initialed, and he confirmed that the initials were his. But look at what are supposed to be the initials of Nurse Audrey M. Bell, who actually did pass the wrist fragments on to the authorities.